The question of what conservatives and Republicans are missing when trying to compete for Gen Z, especially given the significant swing among young women, reveals deeper structural and cultural issues. While the discussion may appear New York-centric, it reflects trends visible in other large, cosmopolitan cities across the United States. Young voters are not simply reacting to party labels. They are responding to tone, authenticity, and whether leaders appear capable of delivering tangible improvements in daily life rather than repeating ideological talking points that feel disconnected from lived realities. A major factor is the growing dissatisfaction with political establishments on both the left and the right. Many people who traditionally lean left feel exhausted by their own leadership, frustrated by figures they believe were unfairly sidelined, and uninspired by candidates who seem imposed rather than earned. This creates space for outsiders and disruptors, figures who can convincingly claim independence from entrenched systems. That hunger for something new mirrors moments like 2016, when disruption itself became a political force powerful enough to override traditional loyalties. Outsider candidates succeed not necessarily because voters agree with every policy position, but because they symbolize a break from stagnation. The appeal lies in the promise of change and the rejection of political scripts that feel overly managed or insincere. This dynamic applies across ideological lines. When voters feel ignored or dismissed, they become receptive to anyone who appears willing to challenge the system. In that sense, success depends less on ideological purity and more on whether voters believe a candidate understands their frustration and speaks directly to it. For figures like Trump or Vance, the challenge is no longer disruption alone, but delivery. Once elected or elevated, outsiders must prove they can convert rhetoric into results. Messaging matters, but outcomes matter more. If someone like J.D. Vance were to run in the future, his clarity would be critical. Falling back into conventional neoconservative language or vague diplomatic phrasing risks alienating voters who are initially drawn to his perceived authenticity and directness. One of the biggest potential failures in such a campaign would be a shift in tone. Talking down to voters, adopting elite political language, or appearing condescending would undermine trust quickly. One of Vance's strengths is consistency. He speaks similarly to supporters, critics, and journalists. That perceived authenticity creates a sense that he is not performing different versions of himself for different audiences. Losing that quality in favor of polished, scripted rhetoric could erode the personal connection that modern politics increasingly relies on. Personality now plays a central role in political success. Voters evaluate how leaders speak, react, and even joke as much as what they propose. If a candidate becomes overly diplomatic, cautious, or detached, they risk blending into the very establishment voters want to reject. Politics has become relational, not just transactional. Voters want to feel seen and respected, not lectured or managed by someone who sounds like every other professional politician they have grown cynical toward. Another major risk lies in prioritizing foreign policy, spending over domestic concerns. For younger generations burdened by debt, housing insecurity, high taxes, and stagnant wages, overseas spending feels abstract and disconnected from daily struggle. When people believe they cannot afford a home, start a family, or achieve basic stability, hearing about billions sent abroad can feel insulting rather than noble. This disconnect can quickly alienate Gen Z voters who prioritize material security over geopolitical ambition. Younger voters are increasingly pragmatic. They are less interested in ideological victories and more focused on whether their lives are improving. Cultural posturing, especially when framed as owning the other side, often feels hollow. Many in Gen Z care less about symbolic culture war wins and more about tangible progress. The joke that people care more about owning a house than owning political opponents resonates because it reflects a real generational shift in priorities. While culture wars still matter, they are no longer sufficient as a central campaign strategy. Candidates who reduce politics to constant outrage risk, exhausting voters who already feel overwhelmed. In contrast, campaigns that focus on affordability, stability, and quality of life tend to resonate more deeply. Even when culturally progressive policies exist, voters respond better when those policies are not the sole or dominant focus of messaging. This balance was evident in campaigns that emphasized economic radicalism while remaining culturally familiar to their base. The key was not abandoning cultural issues, but refusing to let them dominate the narrative. Instead of endless ideological battles, the message centered on improving everyday life. Housing affordability, grocery prices, and the ability to remain in one city mattered more than symbolic gestures or endless online arguments. Many voters express exhaustion with perpetual outrage cycles. They are tired of being pulled into endless debates about who said what or which fringe incident represents a larger cultural collapse. These cycles generate attention, but rarely lead to solutions. The frustration comes from feeling trapped in a loop where neither side offers meaningful progress, only louder reactions to increasingly trivial provocations. The shiny object culture war cycle illustrates this perfectly. A fringe story emerges, provoking outrage. That outrage amplifies the story, which triggers a counterreaction, followed by further escalation. Eventually, people step back and criticize the entire discussion itself. The cycle is repetitive, predictable, and emotionally draining, yet it persists because novelty gives each iteration the illusion of importance, even when the underlying dynamics remain unchanged. This cycle captures attention not because it matters deeply, but because it is easy to engage with. Mocking absurd ideas, reacting to outrage, and sharing memes provide instant gratification. It feels productive, even righteous. But in reality, it diverts attention away from issues with long-term consequences, such as mental health crises, addiction epidemics, and economic instability affecting entire generations. The cost of this distraction is significant. Entire cities struggle with drug epidemics. Young men face rising suicide rates, and many people feel stripped of meaning and direction. Yet these issues receive far less sustained attention than the latest cultural controversy. The brightest minds often end up arguing endlessly about symbolic issues rather than addressing deeper structural problems that will shape society decades from now. Even those who recognize the trap admit they are drawn into it. Outrage is addictive, and calling out absurdity feels cathartic. It is easier to ridicule a ridiculous idea than to wrestle with complex, slow-moving problems. The culture war offers constant stimulation, while real solutions require patience, nuance, and discomfort. That imbalance keeps people stuck in reactive mode rather than constructive engagement. Reflection often comes when creators or commentators step back from constant production. Producing content daily forces participation in outrage cycles simply to fill airtime. Slowing down allows for discernment, enabling deeper focus on topics that truly matter. Fewer episodes, better topics, and genuine interest create more meaningful conversations that respect both the audience's intelligence and emotional bandwidth. Humor becomes a healthy middle ground. Laughing at absurdity without letting it dominate one's mental space allows engagement without obsession. Recognizing that something is ridiculous does not require treating it as civilization ending. Humor diffuses tension and creates shared understanding without feeding outrage machines designed to profit from constant anger. Ultimately, two things can be true at once. Absurd cultural moments can exist, and they can be funny without deserving endless attention. Choosing where to invest attention becomes a moral and intellectual decision. Focusing on what will matter in decades, not just minutes, may be the most radical act in a political culture addicted to distraction.